Hello and welcome to this video on how to answer the unseen poetry question. If you would like to go to the AQA website and find the paper I'm using, it's the specimen paper 8702 from 2014. Now the first thing you have to realize is this is a really long exam, 2 hours and 15 minutes, and that roughly means that you have 1.5 minutes per mark. So our poetry question is 24 marks. Here it is. And that means you've got roughly 36 minutes. So let's call it 35 to be safe. Right, let's have a look at the Mr. Salles method that will fit any poem. And after I've done that, I'm going to look at this poem. I've not read it at all, so I've no idea how this poem will pan out. And I'll try and show you live how my method works. Okay, this is the long version of my method. It's not that long, it's just 5 points. And there's the simplified version. So that's what you'd have on your revision card. And then on the back of the revision card, you'd have this to test to see if you knew it. So I will copy and paste this into the description to the video down there, down below, so you can refer to it. So the first thing I'd say to you is that you really need to read the poem 3 times. So I've just done a mock with my Year 11 class, and only one of my students actually fully understood their unseen poem. So although the unseen poem won't be especially difficult because everyone has to access it, you will leap to assumptions that are wrong if you only read it once. So I desperately want you to read it 3 times. And to give yourself the maximum chance, you really need to hear it in your head. You need to read it out loud in your head because the sound will be very relevant when you get to point 4, looking at the structure and form. Okay, so that you have to practice this. It won't come naturally to you. Often people don't read out loud in their heads, but you must do for this question. Okay. What you will notice in each of these is I keep referring you to the poet's purpose. That's what weaker students won't do. And to get the higher marks, you have to keep thinking, why is the poem written like this? What's the poet trying to get at? So our first point of call is 2 or 3 lines. I can do this almost without reading the rest of the poem. But I'm not going to do that. Obviously, I've read it 3 times. Now I'm going to think, well, what do the first 2 or 3 lines tell me? And of course, later on in the poem, I might change my mind. But at this opening stage, what does the poet want me to think? So that's the poet's purpose. Next, I'm going to find some imagery. And the shorthand for imagery that you'll probably be used to is SOAP aims, simile, onomatopoeia, alliteration, personification, adjectives. I stands for imagery, which is a cheat because these are all imagery, metaphor, and then this I do believe is often treated as sentence structure, and we'll kind of ignore that, although it will be relevant. So hopefully you know what those are. Now you've got 35 minutes, and if you can write about more than one of those in 35 minutes, brilliant. Do use every single one of your minutes, and if you can't, then you're going to look at these bits. Right, so you're going to find something that's significant to you and interpret it, again relating it back to the poet's purpose. Well, let's just have an exploration of the poem now and see how that works. Okay, so as not to bore you, we'll just read it the once. To a daughter leaving home. When I taught you at 8 to ride a bicycle, loping along beside you as you wobbled away on 2 round wheels, my mouth rounding in surprise when you pulled ahead down the curved path of the park, I kept waiting for the thud of your crash as I sprinted to catch up, while you grew smaller, more breakable, with distance, pumping for your life, screaming with laughter, the hair flapping behind you like a handkerchief waving goodbye. So I've got a sense of what's going on there, and in order to look at the poet's purpose, I want to get a feel of the tone of this poem. Now, hopefully, reading it out loud has given you an idea of the tone. He seems excited, or sorry, Linda. She seems excited, but also slightly concerned, slightly worried. And then we've got this image at the end of the handkerchief waving goodbye. Handkerchiefs normally symbolize either tears or surrender. So who's surrendering here? Is the mother giving up her daughter, um, or is she sad about saying goodbye to her daughter? Well, I've got an immediate contrast, haven't I, between this description of teaching the girl to ride at 8 and now the daughter's leaving home. So I understand from that that this whole poem must be a kind of a metaphor where the mother is remembering one particular incident that most reminds her of her daughter leaving home. So perhaps this is the first time where she can remember worrying about what life would be like without her daughter when she has to give her daughter that freedom. Okay, so I've got a sense of the poem. Now I'm going to dive into the first 3 lines. Okay, the first thing I notice is the word when, because that links directly back to the title. So it suggests that this is the first time that the daughter has metaphorically left home when she was 8. So our first question is this too old for the mother to have decided to give her daughter some freedom? So I'd probably argue that it is. I want to say that the mother here has been too overprotective. The other word that I'm going to focus on is this verb taught, which suggests that the mother sees her role as a teacher, and as a teacher, she has to teach her daughter to be safe, but also to be independent, which is what the bicycle symbolizes. The bicycle symbolizes the freedom of this daughter, but also the mother loping along beside is there to provide safety. This verb is really interesting, loping. We've got that elongated O sound here, which is creates a really relaxed sound. So although the mother is moving at speed, there isn't any worry in this movement. There's no urgency in this speed. It's a comfortable speed. So this is perhaps the mother's acceptance that she has to give her daughter this independence. Right, so I've got quite a detailed explanation of how this opening section here is a metaphor for allowing her daughter freedom, but still guiding her, but not feeling a sense of panic. Okay, now the next step that I had to look at was any imagery from soap aims. So let's just have a look and see anything that jumps out at you. Well, do I have any similes? I haven't got likes or as in here. The as is while, so that's not a comparison. And I haven't really got any metaphors apart from my final simile down here. But I don't want to write about that imagery yet because that will be the ending, and I'm saving that for point 5. The reason I always write about the ending last is because that's where the poet's purpose will have changed slightly. And so because I've written about the poet's purpose at the beginning, and then I'm writing about a change, it gives my essay a sense of completeness. I'm really showing the examiner that I've evaluated the whole thing. So I'm not going to dive ahead to that simile. Well, what's interesting about this poem is the sound of it. And I'm glad that my advice said, read it out loud in your head, because the assonance of this poem is going to be really important. So if you don't know, assonance is where the vowel sounds are repeated. So loping along beside you, you wobbled, 2 round wheels, my own mouth rounding. So you can hear those elongated sounds. Again, echoing how relaxed the mother feels at this stage, despite the daughter wobbling and being in some difficulty. But that ow, ow, ow sound mimics the worry that the mother has about the pain her daughter will have if she falls. And if we look at own, to, you, those O sounds wobbled, that open mouthed O is a kind of surprise, isn't it? Which will prepare us for the surprise down here when her daughter suddenly sets off screaming with laughter, sprinting away from her mother. So that assonance has given us both that elongated sound which mimics the feeling of safety that the mother has letting her daughter go, but also that undercurrent of worry, that ow ow sound which mimics the pain that the daughter will have if she falls. And all this is achieved just through that one technique of assonance. You really need to learn it. And this is a poem that really does rely a lot on sound. So I could look at the alliteration of path and park, or the onomatopoeia of thud and crash, or the alliteration of crash and catch. Now, I won't have time to write about all of those, but the onomatopoeia, thud and crash, I suppose, gives me the immediacy of an accident waiting to happen, and that conveys the mother's worry. She's also half expecting it to happen at any time, which is mimicked in I kept waiting. And then we've got that wonderful contrast between her waiting appearing to stand still, but actually now she is sprinting. So there's a deliberate juxtaposition there of what her mind is doing, waiting for disaster, and what her body is doing, sprinting to prevent that disaster. And that juxtaposition conveys the tension that she has between wanting to give her daughter the freedom, but also wanting to protect her from harm. Okay, so I've now had 2 examples of so poems. The third thing I need to do is actually go back to the title and see how that fits with the interpretation I've come up with. So let's go back. The great advantage of looking at a title is that every word counts. So this is now written not about a daughter leaving home, but to a daughter leaving home. So if this poem is written to her own daughter, it is to convey that feeling of love, but also to get the daughter to understand the mother's sense of worry. And it's done in quite a gentle way. She's not trying to nag her daughter, make sure you take care. Don't get drunk when you go off to university. Make sure you always use a condom, whatever it is. She doesn't want to alarm her daughter with her worry. She just wants to paint a picture so that her daughter can see how much her mother is willing her to do well when she leaves, but also how much that she'll worry about her daughter simply because that's what mothers do. So I've got a purpose for the writing. But now if I delve in a little deeper, it's to a daughter leaving home, which then conveys a poet's wider purpose. She's saying this experience is unique to every single mother-daughter relationship. So she's getting any female reader to try to understand what it's like to be a mother and what it's like to be the daughter. And that's just done through my analysis of the word a rather than the. Now, point 4 says we've got to look at the formal structure of the poem and show how this helps me interpret the poet's purpose. And I'm not going to write anything about what it looks like visually on the page. I see a lot of that in students' writing, and it's usually rubbish. Let me show you. So here's a rubbish interpretation based on the visual interpretation. Oh, the poem is written in a single column, like a straight line, which symbolizes the distance between the mother and the daughter running away from her, or symbolizes the difference between the mother at home and the daughter leaving home. Or Oh, if we turn the poem on its side, you get a sense of how the bicycle is moving downhill and speeding up, and then comes uphill and slows down, and then speeds up again as the daughter disappears. All that stuff's rubbish. It's just gibberish, okay? We're going to look at the actual structure of the poem here. So an obvious thing is there's only one full stop, and everything else is pretty much enjambment or the odd comma. Well, that's a real aspect of structure. Why does she do this? Well, it could represent the child's um, sense of freedom. So just as the poem breaks the rules to get rid of punctuation, that mimics the freedom that the child feels, suddenly breaking this rule of being next to her mother, beside you, and then sprinting away and leaving her mother's side. That is a kind of joyous rule breaking. So that's one way to look at it. Another way is to say that it mimics the experience of the mother. Because she she starts loping and then ends up sprinting, we get the sense of her breathlessness, and that's conveyed by the lack of a stop. There's no pause in this poem that's a stop. There's no caesura. She just breathlessly keeps going and going and going, and that mimics her journey, the literal journey here, chasing her daughter, but also the metaphorical journey, being at her daughter's side and trying to keep up with her as she grows up and then leaves home. Okay, so then we've got some real structural points. Enjambment we've mentioned. Another aspect of enjambment that you might not have been taught is the way poets use it to surprise. Let me zoom in. You grew smaller, more breakable with distance, pumping, pumping. So that sounds like you're in control for your life. That suddenly sounds like the daughter's in real danger. And then screaming confirms that danger. And we're completely expecting a disaster here, aren't we? We're associating pumping with the legs going furiously, but it also is reminiscent of the heart. We're thinking about danger, screaming confirms it, but then the wonderful enjambment brings us straight to with laughter, which acts as an anticlimax here, or perhaps even a climax because we've got relief, whereas anticlimax would give us, in a sense, a disappointment or lack of relief. So that contrast there, which is almost an oxymoron, it's almost contradictory, isn't it? Is achieved entirely through the skillful enjambment. Okay, there are other aspects of structure that I can talk about. So repetition is always structure. I'm not going to spend the time doing that now because I want to show you the method. And the method isn't to write down everything you can see in your poem. I've made 2 points about the structure and form, which is fair enough. Okay, because I've only got 35 minutes, I can't write about everything, but I must write about the ending. So we saw the ending earlier, and the crucial bit is going to be this change of perspective. Well, we've already seen the change of perspective here, haven't we? From fear for her daughter to sudden relief that the daughter is laughing. And it may even be the mother laughing at the same time as she herself is relieved. The hair flapping behind you like a handkerchief waving goodbye. And this simile works on at least 2 levels. So one level, this is the daughter's handkerchief, so the daughter is also sad to leave. But on the other level, it symbolizes the mother's sadness. And we could go further and say that what the poet is presenting here is a kind of shared grief that mother and daughter will both have at leaving, but also they're surrendering to it. The handkerchief, the white handkerchief is an image of surrender. So they're both surrendering to this feeling, knowing that it's inevitable that she'll have to go. If we go up a bit here, we've got the hair flapping. Flapping conveys panic, but it also conveys how carefree the daughter feels when she's going. The hair's just flapping behind her loosely, an image of freedom. And then we've got that final word here, deliberately on a line of its own, to convey the fact that the daughter's leaving. If we look at the word itself, I don't know if you've noticed, but it always starts with the word good. We shorten it to buy, but it starts with the word good, and it suggests that leaving isn't a tragedy. Inbuilt within her leaving is an element of goodness. They'll both benefit from the daughter going, because the daughter will grow and presumably find her own way in the world, which is what this extended story about her leaving on the bicycle is all about. So I've got that acceptance now of departure, and the slight change is I get to see it from both the mother's and daughter's points of view, because each part of the description I've tried to show you here describes the daughter as well as the mother at the same time. Okay, well, as always, we need to go back to the mark scheme, and this time we have to ask ourselves, did the method force me to get into the top marks? Well, if I'm exploratory, sorry, let's start that again. I know I'm exploratory because I've looked at my interpretation of the beginning and then how that's changed at the end. So that has to be exploring different ideas. And because I'm thinking about the poet's point of view from the beginning to the end, I have to be conceptualized. I've got this concept of how the poet's point of view is being put forward. I've got lots of precise references. Hopefully you recognize the single word quotations we were looking at. When I write about the writer's methods, that's really another way of saying that I'm using the right terminology. So we've had assonance, enjambment, onomatopoeia, simile. Well, I can't remember the others, but that's plenty. As long as you keep writing about the methods each time you quote, you will be using the right terminology, and therefore you'll get the marks. Is it thoughtful? Well, it has to be thoughtful because I've interpreted 5 different parts of the poem, and that will also make it developed. I've got everything, well, not everything in the poem, but I've got something from every part of the poem, and that has to be developed. And then finally, have I examined the writer's methods? Well, yes, that's really repeating this up here. The difference is the effect of the writer's methods on the reader, and that's really when we talked about the title. Why is she writing this? Who's she writing it for? And we had more than one possible audience, didn't we? We had her own daughter, we had daughters everywhere, and we also had mothers everywhere. So that has forced the examiner to give me a level 6. And the method that I used will do that with every single poem you come across. Okay, finally, the most useful part of the mark scheme, which again you can download from the AQA website, is that it tells you exactly what kinds of examples to pull out of the poem, what's in the examiner's head, and this will give us clues as to what they'll want from any poem. Well, this bit's brilliant news. Examiners are encouraged to reward any valid interpretations. So you can come up with anything within reason, but there is a warning. They have to be valid in the examiner's head. And also, look at that word. We are encouraging you. That means AQA knows they'll get some teachers who look at your interpretation of the poem and will want to simply say, no, that's just wrong. So that's why you need to read the poem 3 times. Don't take any massive leaps of faith. Be quite certain about what you're saying. Okay, the answers might include any of these. Feelings of love and admiration and pride, feelings of fear, feelings of loss about the daughter growing up, feelings of surprise, resentment, sadness about her daughter's waning reliance on her mother and growing independence. So we got most of those, didn't we? We didn't discuss the admiration and pride, but pretty much everything else was in that discussion. And of course, you don't need all of those because you only have 35 minutes. Probably most marks, though, will be won or lost in AO2. So the effects of the imagery, well, that's why we have SOAP aims. We're always talking about imagery. The effects of the vulnerable imagery, wobbled, smaller, breakable. We did talk a bit about the vulnerability, but we did that mainly through assonance. So we put those two together. We got the contrast of screaming and laughter, but do you remember I also called it a juxtaposition, and we also talked about it being oxymoronic, like an oxymoron. So we're again hitting the criteria to use subject terminology well. The use of structure to create a sense of the journey or the distance, well, that's a bit waffly. We were much better because we actually started looking at the lack of punctuation and the enjambment. We were much more specific. Use of present participles to create the sense of life force. Wow, do you think they've been watching Star Wars or something? Right, let me just show you what the present participles mean. Okay, present just means that the verbs happen now, which is annoying actually, because it doesn't happen now, it's all in the past. So the examiners are talking rubbish. They're not present participles, it's past participles. But the participles they're interested in is the ending of the verbs. So ing endings make the moment still happen. So the moment in her memory is not over. So it's pumping, pumping, screaming, flapping, waving. It's like it's still happening. And that's what the examiner means. It's got that sense of immediacy, but they've got so carried away they thought it was in the present, which is just wrong. Anyway, we all make mistakes, but anyway, look out for that technique. And then the effects of the last line, which we talked about in detail, didn't we? So there you have it. The Mr. Salles 5-point method has given you 100%. Hopefully, you'll be able to apply that to any poem that you read. So there it is. Hopefully, you'll be able to remember those 5 simple steps. I haven't been able to give it a nice, interesting mnemonic to help you remember it. I suppose if we got rid of SOAP aims and put OAP's aims, it would kind of say botfy, but that's not particularly memorable. Or why don't we do that? We could get rid of form and put it there. So it would be botsy. Well, that's the best I can do, I suppose. So if you're struggling to remember what the 5 steps are, give it some botsy. I don't know, I'm just making stuff up. But 5 simple steps, you find a way to remember it, and you'll fly. This will only work if you practice it with unseen poems, and that's really easy to do. English departments are full of them. Get your teacher to give you one, or better still, go to your anthology, and if you're doing conflict, then pick a relationships poem and vice versa. Well, thanks for sticking to the end of the video. You're awesome if you have. Give it a like if you've learned from it. And more importantly, please subscribe if you want to learn more.